Every morning at the rundown market district, Archie, a struggling single father barely making ends meet, took a few minutes to prepare a warm breakfast for Venessa, the deaf woman who wandered the streets while everyone else looked away. But one foggy morning, as Archie handed her the hot container, Clinton Dermott, a young lawyer, walked in followed by 4 towering bodyguards. They looked straight at Venessa and said in a cold voice, "You've been found." Archie froze. The poor girl he'd been helping all this time. Who was she, really? The city woke before dawn with the grinding of delivery trucks and the clatter of metal gates rolling open. In the industrial district, where the old morning market sprawled across cracked pavement, vendors shouted prices while exhaust fumes mixed with the smell of fresh bread and rotting vegetables. This was where people came when they had nowhere else to go, where a dollar stretched further and questions weren't asked. It was a place of second chances and last resorts, where dignity came cheap, but kindness was rarer than gold. Archie Flynn was 36 years old, though the lines around his eyes made him look older. He'd been a military engineer once, the kind of man who could calculate load-bearing stress in his sleep and disarm a dozen different explosive devices. But that life ended the day his wife died giving birth to their son. He'd left the service, left everything behind. And now, he hauled crates at the morning market for cash under the table. His hands, once steady enough to cut the red wire with seconds to spare, now bore calluses from rope and splinters from cheap wooden pallets. Every morning at 4, Archie's alarm didn't need to ring. His body woke on its own, trained by years of military discipline and sharpened by the terror of being late, of losing the few dollars that kept his son fed. He'd move quietly through their one-room apartment above a closed laundromat, careful not to wake Henry, and pack 2 thermoses, one with coffee for himself, one with hot chocolate for later. In a worn lunchbox, he'd arrange whatever he could spare, usually a sandwich, an apple, maybe some cookies if he'd managed to buy the discount package at the corner store. Henry Corbin was 7 years old, bright-eyed despite living in a world that had taken his mother before he could remember her face. The boy had his father's quiet strength and his mother's gentle heart. He woke each morning to find his father already gone, a note on the table with a smiley face drawn in Archie's careful hand, and a bowl covered with a plate, oatmeal still warm underneath. Henry never complained about the cramped apartment or the clothes that didn't quite fit. He saved his allowance in a jar shaped like a rocket ship and told his father he was saving for college, though Archie suspected the boy was really saving to help with rent. Venessa Constance appeared at the market 6 months ago like a ghost materializing from morning fog. She was 27, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing clothes that had seen better years but were always clean, always carefully mended. She never spoke, communicated only through writing on a small notepad she kept in her coat pocket, or through simple gestures that most people didn't bother trying to understand. The other vendors assumed she was homeless, maybe mentally unstable, definitely not their problem. They stepped around her when she sat on the curb, ignored her when she watched them with those clear, sad eyes. But there were things about Venessa that didn't quite add up, details that Archie noticed because he'd been trained to notice details. The way she held a pen suggested years of good education. Her posture was too straight, too refined for someone who supposedly slept on streets. Her gestures carried an unconscious elegance, and sometimes, when heavy footsteps approached, she'd flinch with a fear that seemed too specific, too practiced, like she was running from something she knew all too well. Archie started helping her without really deciding to. One morning, he had an extra sandwich. Venessa was sitting on the loading dock, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. He handed it to her. She looked up, startled, then took it with both hands like it was made of crystal. The gratitude in her eyes hit him harder than he'd expected. The next day, he made sure to pack extra. Then it became routine. Every morning, Archie would find Venessa, hand her breakfast, sometimes a warm jacket when the temperature dropped, gloves when her fingers looked purple with cold. Henry met Venessa on a Saturday when Archie had to bring him to work because the neighbor who usually watched him had the flu. The boy approached her without fear, sat down beside her on the curb, and started showing her his drawings. Venessa smiled, really smiled, and began teaching him simple signs. "Thank you," "hello," "friend." Henry was fascinated. Within weeks, he'd learned dozens of signs from library books, practicing with his father at night, eager to talk to Venessa properly. The woman seemed to light up when Henry arrived. her whole demeanor changing from cautious and withdrawn to something almost joyful. It was a relationship built on small kindnesses and mutual understanding. Archie never asked questions. Venessa never offered explanations. But there was an unspoken trust forming, fragile as morning frost but growing stronger each day. Archie sensed she was afraid of something, sensed she was hiding, but he respected her silence. In this neighborhood, everyone had secrets. Everyone had reasons for being here instead of somewhere better. One Tuesday morning, Archie arrived to find Venessa not at her usual spot. He felt an immediate stab of concern, though he told himself she didn't owe him her presence. But as he moved between stalls, delivering crates, he kept scanning the crowd. Finally, near the closed bathroom behind the fish vendors, he found her collapsed against the wall, her face pale and lips almost blue. Archie dropped to his knees beside her, checking her pulse the way he'd been trained years ago, weak but steady. He lifted her easily. She weighed almost nothing, and carried her to his truck. The market boss shouted something about leaving during a shift, but Archie ignored him. Some things mattered more than a day's wages. He drove to the free clinic 3 blocks away, Venessa drifting in and out of consciousness in the passenger seat. The clinic nurse took one look and ushered them into a room. While they waited for the doctor, Archie noticed Venessa's coat had gotten wet from lying on the ground. He carefully removed it, reaching for the spare sweatshirt he kept in his truck. That's when he saw them. Dark purple bruises spreading across her back and ribs, some old and yellowing, others fresh and angry. These weren't from a fall. These were from someone's hands, someone's fists, deliberate and repeated. The doctor confirmed what Archie feared. Malnutrition, dehydration, and injuries, consistent with physical abuse, over an extended period. They gave her an IV, some crackers, a warm blanket. Archie sat beside her bed, his jaw tight with an anger he hadn't felt since his military days. Who would do this? Why? When Venessa woke, she saw Archie and immediately reached for her notepad with shaking hands. She wrote 3 words. Please don't tell. Her eyes were desperate, pleading. Archie wanted to argue, wanted to call the police, wanted to find whoever did this and make them answer for it. But he saw the terror in her face and realized that whatever she was running from, it was worse than bruises. So he nodded. He wouldn't tell, but he also wouldn't leave her alone anymore. Henry visited Venessa at the clinic after school. The boy brought his homework and sat cross-legged on the floor beside her bed, signing about his day while Venessa watched with tears streaming down her face. In her pocket, folded carefully, Henry found something when he was looking for her notepad to draw her a picture. It was a torn piece of paper with an embossed seal, partly burned but still showing what looked like an official legal symbol. Venessa saw him holding it, and her face went white. She snatched it back, hands trembling. She wrote rapidly, "Don't show anyone. Please." Henry didn't understand, but he promised. That night, Archie found his son unusually quiet. The boy finally asked why someone would hurt Venessa, why she was so scared. Archie didn't have good answers. He just pulled Henry close and promised they'd keep her safe, somehow. Things changed after the hospital visit. Venessa was released with instructions to rest and eat regularly, but she had nowhere to go. Archie found her sitting on the clinic steps the next morning, her few belongings in a grocery bag beside her. He made a decision that he knew was possibly stupid, possibly dangerous, but absolutely necessary. He took her home. The one-room apartment wasn't much, but it had a couch that folded out into a bed. Henry insisted Venessa take his small room. He'd sleep on the couch with Dad, he declared proudly. It would be like camping. Venessa tried to refuse through a flurry of signs and written notes, but Henry was already carrying her bag inside, chattering about how she could meet his fish, Mr. Bubbles, who lived in a bowl by the window. For 3 days, it felt almost normal. Venessa rested. Henry taught her more signs and showed her his schoolwork. Archie went to work but found himself checking his phone constantly during breaks, calling Henry to make sure everything was okay. Venessa helped where she could, folding laundry with meticulous care, organizing the tiny kitchen, leaving grateful notes on the table. But on the 4th night, Archie came home to find their door ajar, the cheap lock broken. Inside, The apartment had been searched. Drawers pulled out, cushions overturned. Henry's school books scattered across the floor. Venessa stood in the corner, shaking violently, while Henry gripped a baseball bat with white knuckles, trying to be brave. They didn't take anything because there was nothing worth taking. But they'd left a message, carved into the kitchen table with something sharp. "We're coming." Archie felt ice flood his veins. This wasn't random. Someone was hunting Venessa, and they'd found her. That night, Venessa wrote him the whole truth, on page after page of notebook paper. She couldn't speak, could barely see through tears, but she had to make him understand. She wrote that men had been watching the market for weeks, that they'd found her temporary room last week and torn it apart. That she'd been sleeping in different places, never the same spot twice. Trying to stay invisible. She wrote, "I never wanted to bring danger to you and Henry. I should leave. I'm so sorry." Archie read every word, his expression growing harder with each line. When she finished, he took the pen and wrote back, "You're not leaving. We'll figure this out together." Venessa stared at those words, like they were written in a foreign language she was trying desperately to translate. The internal war Archie fought that night was brutal and brief. Every instinct screamed danger. He was bringing unknown trouble into his son's life. He could barely afford their own rent, and now he was protecting a stranger. The smart move, the safe move, was to take Venessa to a police station and walk away. Let the professionals handle it. But when he looked at her terrified face, at Henry, who'd already started calling her Nessa and teaching her the signs for family, Archie knew he couldn't abandon her. His wife had died because he wasn't there. He'd failed to protect her. He wouldn't fail again. Venessa was thinking the same calculations in reverse. Every moment she stayed put these good people in danger. Archie worked brutal hours to support his son. Henry deserved a childhood free from fear. She'd already caused enough damage just by existing near them. The right thing to do was vanish, tonight, while they slept. She could take the bus to another city, start over somewhere else. Keep running forever if she had to. But when Henry signed goodnight and added the sign for sister with a hopeful smile, something in Venessa's chest broke open. She hadn't had family in so long. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted instead of hunted. The storm hit on a Friday night with the kind of violence that made the weather service issue warnings and the power company preemptively apologize for outages. Rain hammered the streets in sheets, turning the market district into a river of trash and debris. Archie had worked a double shift, loading trucks in the downpour, and came home soaked to the bone, exhausted to his marrow. He found Henry and Venessa playing cards by flashlight. Because the power had gone out an hour ago. They'd made it into an adventure. "Camping indoors," Henry announced. Archie managed a tired smile, peeling off his wet jacket. Then he heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside. Too many of them, too deliberate. A voice said something he couldn't make out. Another voice answered. They were searching floor by floor. Archie moved on pure instinct. He grabbed Henry with one arm, Venessa's hand with the other, and pulled them toward the fire escape window. No time to pack. No time to think. He shoved the window open against the wind, rain immediately soaking them all. The metal stairs were slick and treacherous. Henry whimpered but didn't cry. Venessa's eyes were huge with terror, but she climbed down without hesitation. Behind them, someone kicked in the apartment door. Shouting echoed into the storm. Archie pushed his son and Venessa down faster, his boots slipping on wet metal, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. They hit the alley at a run. Archie scooped Henry up, grabbed Venessa's arm, and ran into the storm-dark streets. The city at night in a thunderstorm was a nightmare landscape. Water rushed through gutters like rapids. Lightning turned everything stark white, then plunged it back into shadow. Archie's lungs burned. Henry clung to his neck, small body shaking with cold and fear. Venessa ran beside them, her breath coming in gasps, limping on her injured ankle but not slowing down. They couldn't go to neighbors, couldn't risk bringing this to anyone else. Archie's mind raced through options. The market would be locked up. The clinic had security cameras. They needed somewhere abandoned, somewhere off the grid. Then he remembered the old warehouse by the docks, condemned for 2 years, forgotten by everyone. The warehouse was more ruin than building, its roof half collapsed, its windows empty, eyes staring at nothing. But one corner still had walls, and a small space that stayed relatively dry. Archie kicked open the rusted side door and ushered them inside. They huddled together in the dark, listening to rain pound the broken roof. Listening for footsteps that might mean they'd been followed. Henry was shivering violently. Archie stripped off his own wet shirt and wrapped it around his son, rubbing his arms to generate warmth. Venessa was crying silently, her whole body trembling. Archie pulled them both close, using his body heat to warm them, whispering that they were safe now, it was okay. He had them. Venessa buried her face against Archie's shoulder, and for the first time, she let herself truly feel it. The fear she'd been carrying for months. The exhaustion of running. The overwhelming gratitude that someone was protecting her instead of hunting her. She felt his heartbeat steady against her cheek, felt Henry's small hand find hers in the darkness, and something inside her that had been frozen solid began to crack open. They stayed in that warehouse through the night. Archie didn't sleep, keeping watch, listening to every sound. At some point, Henry dozed off, exhausted. Venessa stayed awake too, her eyes catching stray light like a cornered animal's. Archie found himself studying her face in the dim glow of distant streetlights filtering through broken windows. Who was she really? What had she done to warrant this kind of manhunt? When dawn finally came gray and cold, Archie knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Venessa needed medical attention for her ankle. Henry needed food and dry clothes. They needed help from someone with more resources than a dock worker's empty pockets. He made the decision to risk the hospital, a bigger one across town where they had security and cameras and people who asked fewer questions. The emergency room was chaos at 7 in the morning, filled with overnight accidents and early shift injuries. Archie carried Henry, who'd woken up with a fever, while Venessa limped beside them, trying to be invisible. The intake nurse took one look at the bedraggled trio and fast-tracked them to a room. The doctor who examined Venessa was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and no-nonsense efficiency. She checked the ankle, declared it sprained but not broken, and started wrapping it. Then she paused, staring at Venessa's wrist. There was a birthmark there, small and oddly shaped, almost like a constellation of tiny stars. The doctor's eyes widened. She left abruptly, returning with an older nurse who looked at the birthmark and made a strangled sound. Archie watched this with growing confusion. The nurse pulled out her phone, scrolled through something, then showed the doctor a photo. They both looked at Venessa like she'd materialized from myth. The doctor's voice was barely a whisper when she asked, "Are you Venessa Constance?" "The Venessa Constance?" Vanessa's face drained of all color. Slowly, she nodded. The nurse pulled Archie aside, while the doctor made a phone call that sounded urgent and complicated. The nurse explained in a rush that made Archie's head spin. Venessa Constance was the sole heir to the Constance Foundation, a charitable trust worth over $1 billion, established by her parents before they died in a plane crash 5 years ago. After their death, Venessa had been placed under the legal guardianship of her uncle, Marcus Whitfield, who was supposed to manage the foundation until she turned 30. But 6 months ago, Venessa had disappeared. There'd been news coverage, private investigators, a massive search. The official story was that she'd had a mental breakdown and wandered off. But there were rumors, whispers that Marcus Whitfield wasn't the benevolent uncle he appeared to be, that he'd been embezzling foundation funds, that he wanted Venessa declared incompetent so he could maintain control forever. Archie's mind reeled. The woman he'd been giving sandwiches to, the quiet girl who played cards with his son, was a billionaire heiress. She'd been hiding in plain sight at a rundown market, living as a homeless person, because running was safer than staying in a mansion with her own guardian. The truth settled over the room like concrete dust. Venessa couldn't call for help because her uncle controlled her phone, her email, her entire life. She couldn't go to the police because he had connections, lawyers, influence. She'd made herself disappear because it was the only way to survive until she could find someone she could trust, someone who could help her reclaim what was rightfully hers. The hospital administrator arrived. Then security. Archie found himself being questioned about how he knew Venessa, whether he'd kidnapped her, whether he knew about the reward money. The implication was clear and insulting. He was a poor dock worker, She was an heiress. Obviously, he had ulterior motives. Archie felt his jaw tighten with rage, but forced himself to stay calm for Henry's sake. Then everything changed again. A group arrived at the emergency room entrance with the kind of presence that made people step back instinctively. 4 bodyguards in dark suits moved with military precision, scanning the room with professional paranoia. Behind them walked a young man in an expensive coat, his face sharp with intelligence and determination. He walked straight to Venessa's room, ignored the security guard trying to block him, and showed a leather credential case to the doctor. Clinton Dermott was 32 years old and looked like he'd been built in a lab specifically to practice corporate law. But his eyes, when they landed on Venessa, showed genuine relief. He spoke quickly, his voice carrying authority that made hospital staff snap to attention. He was Venessa's attorney, hired secretly 6 months ago before she disappeared. He'd been searching for her ever since, following breadcrumbs and dead ends, until the hospital's computer system flagged her name and birthmark description. This was the moment from the market, the scene that would eventually explain everything. Clinton looked at Venessa, and his expression softened just slightly. "Miss Constance, we've been looking for you for 3 months. We're here to protect you now." Venessa began to cry, real sobs shaking her shoulders. Henry went to her immediately, taking her hand and signing the words for safe and home. Clinton watched this interaction, then looked at Archie with new assessment. The lawyer asked quietly who he was, how he knew Venessa. Archie explained in short, terse sentences. Breakfast, kindness, protection, nothing more complicated than that. Clinton's expression shifted from suspicion to something approaching respect. He asked Archie and Henry to step into the hall for a moment. There were legal matters to discuss. Once outside, the lawyer laid it out plainly. Marcus Whitfield had declared Venessa mentally incompetent 6 months ago, petitioned for permanent guardianship, and was slowly draining the Foundation's assets. Venessa had fled before he could institutionalize her, but she'd had no way to fight back alone. What Clinton needed to explain next made Archie's world tilt sideways. Before she ran, Venessa had signed emergency trust documents with Clinton's law firm. If anything happened to her, if she disappeared or died, the Foundation would be placed in the care of someone she trusted completely. The documents were sealed, witnessed, legally binding. But Venessa had insisted on one condition. The trustee had to be someone with no connection to her old life, someone who'd proven their character through actions, not words. Clinton opened his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. Inside was a document dated 3 weeks ago. The writing was Venessa's careful script. The document named Archibald Flynn as emergency trustee of the Constance Foundation, with full authority to act on her behalf until she could reclaim control herself. Archie stared at the paper like it was written in code he couldn't crack. He looked at Clinton, waiting for the punchline. The catch. The moment this turned into a scam. But the lawyer's face was perfectly serious. Venessa had chosen him, a man she barely knew, a dockworker with calluses and an old truck, someone who'd given her breakfast without asking for anything in return. She'd chosen him because he was the only person who treated her like a human being instead of an asset. Henry tugged on his father's sleeve, asking what was happening. Archie knelt down, tried to find words simple enough. He explained that Venessa needed help getting away from bad people, that lawyers were involved now, that everything was going to be okay. Henry signed to Venessa through the doorway, asking if she was okay now. She nodded, signing back. "Thanks to your dad." The hospital room became command central for Clinton's legal team. They worked with swift, brutal efficiency. Calls were made to judges, to federal investigators, to the Foundation's board of directors, who'd been suspicious of Marcus Whitfield for months, but lacked evidence. Venessa provided that evidence through hours of written testimony, detailing embezzlement, forged signatures, threats made in the dark of her own bedroom. Marcus Whitfield was arrested at his office by federal agents. The news broke like a thunderstorm. Headlines screamed about the missing heiress found, about the corrupt guardian, about billions in charitable funds nearly stolen. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Cameras flashed when Clinton made a statement on the front steps. But inside, in a quiet room, something simpler and more profound was happening. Venessa sat with Archie and Henry, writing out everything she wanted to say. She apologized for bringing danger to them, thanked them for saving her life, not just from her uncle's men but from losing faith in humanity entirely. She explained that she'd been so alone, so certain everyone only wanted her money, that Archie's simple kindness had felt like a miracle. Archie didn't know what to say. He'd just given her breakfast. He'd just done what any decent person would do. The idea that this qualified him to manage a billion-dollar foundation was absurd. He tried to explain this to Clinton, who just smiled tiredly and said that's exactly why Venessa chose him. Because he didn't want the power. Because he'd proven he couldn't be bought. Henry had a simpler question, posed in sign language to Venessa. Are you going to leave now? Are we going to be a family still? Venessa looked at this 7-year-old boy who'd learned an entire language just to talk to her, who'd shared his bedroom and his toys and his father without hesitation, and she felt something shift permanently in her chest. The legal resolution took weeks of paperwork and court hearings, but the outcome was never in doubt. Marcus Whitfield faced multiple felony charges. The foundation's board was restructured. Clinton's firm took over temporary management, while Venessa recovered and prepared to take her rightful place. Archie was honored by the city for protecting a vulnerable person, though he refused all interviews and insisted he wasn't a hero, just a father doing what was right. The foundation's work continued, expanded even. Archie, despite his protests, found himself attending meetings about grant allocations and charitable programs. Venessa needed his perspective, Clinton explained. She needed someone who understood poverty not as a concept in a report but as a daily reality. Someone who knew what it meant to choose between rent and medicine, who could evaluate which programs actually helped versus which ones looked good in press releases. The market where Archie had worked received a grant for renovations and worker protections. Venessa insisted on it, her first official act after reclaiming the foundation. The vendors who'd ignored her when she sat hungry on their curb now nodded respectfully when she visited with Clinton and a security detail. Archie thought there was poetry in that, though he kept the observation to himself. Months passed. Summer turned to fall. The media circus moved on to other scandals. Life found a new rhythm. Strange, but somehow right. Venessa rented a small house 3 blocks from Archie and Henry's apartment. She could have bought a mansion, could have returned to her family's estate, but she chose proximity to the people who'd become her family, the people who'd loved her when she had nothing. The first morning in her new house, Venessa woke before dawn. Old habits died hard. She moved through her kitchen, small but filled with light, and began cooking. Pancakes, eggs, toast, fresh fruit. She packed it carefully in containers and walked the 3 blocks just as the sun was rising. Archie opened his door to find Venessa standing there with breakfast for 2, a smile on her face that he'd never seen during all those months at the market. Henry appeared behind his father, still in pajamas, and threw his arms around Venessa, signing good morning so enthusiastically he nearly knocked the food from her hands. They ate together at the small table, Henry chattering about school, Archie quiet but present, Venessa signing responses and occasionally writing notes when signs weren't enough. It wasn't the breakfast of billionaires. It was scrambled eggs and slightly burned toast and laughter that echoed off thin walls. It was Henry teaching Venessa a new sign he'd learned. It was Archie's hand briefly covering Venessa's when she wrote thank you for the 100th time. His voice gentle when he said she didn't need to keep thanking them. This became their routine. Some mornings Venessa cooked. Some mornings Archie did. Some mornings they went to the diner on the corner and Henry ordered chocolate chip pancakes with a flourish that made them both laugh. They were a family assembled from broken pieces, held together not by blood but by choice, by kindness, by the simple revolutionary act of seeing each other's humanity. On a Sunday morning, 6 months after that rainy night in the warehouse, they sat in Venessa's small backyard while Henry played with the neighbor's dog. Venessa wrote a note and slid it across to Archie. He read it slowly. Thank you for believing I was worth helping when I had nothing to offer in return. Archie took the pen and wrote back. You offered everything that mattered. You taught my son that kindness crosses all barriers. You showed us both. That family isn't about who you're born to, but who you choose. Venessa read this, and tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Henry noticed and came running, signing frantically to ask if she was sad. Venessa shook her head and signed back the word for happy, then the word for home, then pulled both of them into a hug fierce enough to make Henry laugh and Archie's eyes sting. The morning sun climbed higher, washing everything in gold. The city hummed its endless song beyond the backyard fence. Inside this small circle of light, 3 people sat together, bound by the kind of love that couldn't be bought or sold or stolen, the kind that grew from seeds planted in darkness, watered by sacrifice, blooming finally into something unbreakable. Venessa had spent months running from people who wanted to control her, diminish her, reduce her to the sum of her bank account. She'd found safety with a man who'd never asked her name, never wanted anything except to see her fed and warm. She'd found family with a boy who'd learned a new language just to say hello. Archie had spent years believing he'd failed the person he loved most, haunted by his wife's absence, terrified of failing his son. He'd learned that protection sometimes looked like breakfast in the morning and patience at midnight. That strength could be quiet and still shake the foundations of injustice. Henry had learned that the world was full of people who needed kindness, and that offering it cost nothing but meant everything. That family came in unexpected forms, and that love, real love, was spelled in actions rather than words. They would face challenges ahead. The Foundation's work was complicated and vast. Venessa's recovery from trauma would take time. Archie's transition from dock worker to philanthropic advisor was still surreal. But they would face it together, this unlikely family forged in a market stall and tempered in storm. The breakfast dishes sat empty on the table. Henry's laughter rang through the yard. Venessa signed something to Archie that made him smile. Really smile. The kind of smile that reached his eyes and erased the years from his face. She'd signed the words for together and always and home. He signed back, his gestures still clumsy but heartfelt, the signs for family and love and yes. In a city where millions of people passed each other every day without seeing, where loneliness was epidemic and trust was currency, 3 souls had found each other against impossible odds. They'd built something precious from the raw materials of kindness and courage. They'd proven that the smallest acts could change everything, that the weakest could become the strongest, that love multiplied instead of divided when shared. The sun climbed higher. The coffee grew cold. The dog stole a piece of toast from Henry's plate. Venessa wrote another note. Just 3 words this time. This is home. She showed it to Archie and Henry, who nodded in perfect agreement. Home wasn't the house with the backyard or the apartment above the laundromat. Home was this table, these people, this moment of absolute belonging. Home was knowing that when the world turned cruel, there were hands to hold and hearts that beat in rhythm with your own. Home was the promise that no matter what storms came, they would weather them together. Venessa folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket with all the others. The record of a journey from despair to joy, from isolation to family, from running to finally standing still in the presence of unconditional love. She looked at the man who'd given her breakfast when she was invisible, at the boy who'd learned her language when the world refused to listen, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The morning stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and promise, and the simple, profound gift of being together.